Well, it's all just a bookkeeping trick at our expense, right?
Right, that's it. But the consequences will come.
All right, now I want to try to. I'm not very good at playing devil's advocate because I'm a pretty anti-interventionist kind of guy myself. But I want to try to see if I can poke holes in your theory here a little bit about what ought to be done here. If unemployment gets up to 30% or worse, we could have a civil war. If take the 1930s. If unemployment was 25, almost 30%, and Roosevelt, by inflation and by, do nothing work programs and whatever, was able to bring that unemployment rate down to only 15%. Isn't that important? I mean, couldn't it be that America would have become a fascist or a communist dictatorship in the 1930s if something hadn't been done about that unemployment?
Well, it looks like they did a lot of big government programs back then, and they've continued. And look at what they're doing now, even with the bailouts. They're using it as an opportunity to become fascistic. They're taking over ownership. We're becoming very socialistic. But the question is if nobody wants a civil war or 30% unemployment rates, but I'm convinced that the policies that we have now are much more likely to give us that than if we do the right thing. If we did the right thing and we had a bad year and you had a 30% unemployment rate, yes, the government's responsibility would be to quell the violence. But this whole idea that if we don't do anything and we continue to spend and you have a collapse of the dollar, you're going to have this. And that's the whole reason why we don't want them to follow these policies. So, and if we did have it under today's circumstances, or if we tried to improve things and it got worse for a year, you have to still blame the people who created the mess, created the bubble, made the mess. They have to be blamed for it, not for us who's getting the drug addict off his drugs. If we take them off the drugs and give them some medication and they're getting better, but they don't feel very good, the doctor shouldn't be blamed for that. The person who got sick and got addicted could be blamed. Mm-hmm. And this is the whole thing. The most important thing we do is blame the right people for the crisis we're in. If we blame free markets and capitalism and sound money like we did in the 30s for our problems, we can't have a recovery. I mean, we're going to lose even more freedom. The only advantage we have today that I think is a big advantage is in the 30s they said, it was they didn't blame the Federal Reserve System. They blamed the gold standard and they blamed capitalism. Well, today we have to prove to them that we haven't had capitalism for a long time, and we certainly haven't had the gold standard, so we have to blame the paper standard. We have to blame the Federal Reserve, and we have to come down hard on them, and they have to be the culprits, and I think we could come out of here with a victory, but it will be touch and go on what happens if we end up with violence, and of course that's what I worry about the most.
Okay, so if we can stay on that drug analogy, when I say, we could have this terrible high level of unemployment that could lead to disaster, that's the kick. That's getting off of opium, and it's really uncomfortable. But when I'm saying, maybe it would be better to inflate, make work programs, et cetera, to keep that unemployment rate down, you're saying that is the equivalent of more drugs, and we're running a risk of overdose. We're running a risk of inflating so much to try to keep people employed that everybody ends up unemployed. The patient dies on the table of too much paper money.
Yes, and your argument has some credibility because that's essentially what they do, what they have done in the past 35 years. Every time a recession came along, they didn't want to really have the true correction. They say, well, let's keep inflating. The NASDAQ bubble breaks, so Greenspan comes along and he gives us the housing bubble. And that's why people are tempted to believe the presentation of your argument, and yet this is different. And finally, it doesn't work anymore. Finally, the money doesn't work anymore, and that's why the value of the dollar is so crucial. Like today the dollar was down over 1%, and that's a lot for one day. So and even that isn't the best measurement of the dollar being down against other currencies, because the currencies aren't worth anything either. They're all paper currencies. Ultimately, the only thing you have to watch is the value of the purchasing power of money throughout the world, and in particular with the dollar. And I think the purchasing power of the dollar will go down.
Mm. Well, now, one of the things that's argued is that if we followed your approach of do nothing, that we could get into a deflationary spiral, which I guess the analogy would be coming off of a heroin addiction so harshly that they end up having a heart attack and dying anyway, even though, from kicking the drugs, that you would have good businesses that ought to survive, all things being equal, that will be brought down by everybody else being brought down, and the whole economy will end up, systemic risk and so forth being destroyed, including the parts of the economy that on any given day ought to be sustainable projects.
I think people ought to concentrate on the word correction. We talk about recessions and depressions and deflation, but what we're looking for is a correction, and that's a good word because there's been a lot of mistakes made. There's been too many houses built, so we have to correct that. So what does the government do? They come in and say, oh, the prices of houses are going down. We have to prop the prices up. And at the same time, we better stimulate housing because that will create jobs. No, you don't want that. You want it to correct. You want the housing prices to go down so poor people who did happen to save some money can buy a house again. And then when all these corrections are made, then we will have real growth again. We can't patch it up just like we did for all these recessions that we've had for 35 years because this one is quite different.
Okay, and now to wrap up this conversation, Dr. Paul, how much money do we really spend on our military forces around the world, and how much of that realistically could be cut? If, for example, you were the president instead of Barack Obama, what kind of military budget would we really be looking at for, say, next year?
Well, some have done some studies, and they add up the total amount per year that we spend maintaining our empire, and it comes up to over $1 trillion. But you can't cut all that because what they work into that is some interest and taking care of veterans and whatever. But you could cut a lot. I mean, how many hundreds of billions of dollars could you cut if you didn't have troops in Korea or Japan or Germany or the Middle East? You could. I would say that you could very quickly, first year or two, you could probably save a couple $100 billion, and then the next year even more per year. And the big thing would be the shift of attitude, the change. People would know the direction we're going in. I mean, the whole world would change if they all of a sudden realized that we weren't going to be the bully of the world, telling everybody what to do, and if they don't do it our way, we either bomb them, and if they do it our way, then we give them more foreign aid. A lot of money could be saved, so just the perception would be very good. Matter of fact, if we didn't have our Navy over threatening Iran, who knows, maybe, and we had a different policy, maybe oil prices would come down, especially if we quit printing so much money and didn't run up so much debt.
Uh-huh. Well, then again, that would be terrible, right, for any price to come down, according to all the experts running
they
this
want it
thing.
to go up.
Well, maybe we should just threaten them some more
yeah.
to stimulate the economy. All right, well, I really appreciate your time on the show today, Dr. Paul. Thank you,
Scott.
All right, y'all, that's Dr. Ron Paul. He's the author of A Foreign Policy of Freedom. And, are you still there, Ron?
Yeah.
And what's the name of the new book about the Fed?
And the Fed.
And the Fed. And
right.
when is it coming out?
September.
In September. All right. Well, I can't wait to get my hands on that.
Okay.
All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Also, I strongly urge you guys to read The Revolution, a Manifesto. It's absolutely great. And A Foreign Policy of Freedom is a collection of speeches on foreign affairs going all the way back to the 1970s. Brilliant stuff. Guy's been right this whole time.